and welcome back to another video from me, the sarcastic school teacher. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on language techniques. And these are the kind of things that you'll want to use in your own creative and descriptive writing, such as if you're writing a story, which I'm sure you do avidly every day. They're also things you might want to use when you write your own poetry, which I'm sure, again, you write tons of poems. If you don't, maybe after this lesson, go away, write a poem. It might be cool. Language techniques are also things that we'll look for when you analyse poetry. When you analyse a piece of writing, when you're analysing an extract from a story, look for these language techniques. Where does the writer use them? Why do they use them? To what effect? So we're going to learn today a way to remember some of these techniques, how we define them, what are the definitions, and also look at some examples that will hopefully inspire you to do your own writing. So, let's go. The way that you can remember some of the main descriptive techniques, the main language techniques, is using an acronym called Promis. What is an acronym? I hear you cry. Well, an acronym is a word in which each letter stands for another word. So in the word promise, P stands for a language technique, R stands for a language technique, and so on. So your job is to have a think. Have a little think, because the best learning is not just listening, it's interacting, it's doing. So your job right now, maybe write it down, or even just say them out loud. What language techniques do you know that start with any of these letters? Because I'm going to bring them up any second. So you're going to want to think, oh yeah, I knew that one, go me. Okay, here we go. So in Promise, in this acronym, P, personification, R, repetition, O, onomatopoeia, M, metaphor, I, imagery, S, simile, and E, emotive language. Did you get any of these? If you did, well done. If you didn't, don't worry about it. At the end of this lesson, you will have learned these. So now what we're going to do for each of these is we're going to decide what do they mean, how would we define each of these language techniques, and then look at a little example that I've done for you today. Lucky you. So here we go. P, personification. But what does it mean? What do you think it means? Right now, have a think, or say it out loud, or even write down how would you define what personification is. If you've heard of this word before and you think you know what it means, what do you think it means? What is the definition? Here's mine. When you describe an object and you give it human characteristics. When you describe an object and you give it human characteristics, sometimes people say human features. So here's an example. And I've just decided to write a sentence and describe the sun using personification. I'm going to personify it. Look at that, happy little sun. Here's my sentence. The sun smiled down on me. And why is this personification? Because when you personify something, you take something that is not human, an object, a thing, and you give it human features. You know, suns don't generally smile. They're huge, gigantic balls of burning gas, millions and billions of miles away. Pretty sure they don't have mouths and they're not smiling. If they do that, that's a pretty terrifying universe. So, it's personifying the sun. So I've written this fairly simple sentence. The sun smiled down on me. But for each of these, I've also written a more developed sentence for those of you who want something a little bit more challenging, a little bit more descriptive. Here's my better sentence. Brightly, the serene sun smiled benevolently down on me. And why is this better? So I start with an adverb, brightly. Instead, I include better adjectives like serene. So it's just a bit of a more developed sentence. So depending on your ability or the age of whoever is watching this, you might decide when you do your own piece of writing that you're going to do the more simple sentences, Or you might think, no, I'm going to do bits of writing. I'm going to write a poem in which I'm going to make it much more developed and complicated. That is up to you, my friends. So that's personification. Okay, next, repetition. What is repetition? What is repetition? What is repetition? There was a clue. How would you define repetition? When you repeat a word or phrase a number of times for effect. So for those of you who are young and are watching this video, maybe you do this to your parents all the time. Mom, 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 can I watch TV? Can I have my phone back? Etc. I'm sure you repeat things many times and drive your parents crazy. Or maybe you're delightful and you don't. But this is repetition. In your piece of writing, in a poem, in a story, when you repeat a word or phrase a number of times for effect, it has to be for effect. It can't just be that you decide you're going to repeat the word banana for no reason. That might make your piece of writing sound crazy, unless it's about bananas. So it's got to be a specific word or phrase. So I've chosen for my next sentence to describe some birds, some little birdies. Aren't they pretty? Here's my first, more simple sentence. The birds were singing joyfully and swooping joyfully. What have I repeated? I've repeated the word joyfully to really emphasize the sheer joy, and happiness of these birds. And here's my more developed sentence. Gazing upwards, I saw birds singing joyfully, swooping joyfully, and soaring joyfully. So as you can see, I've added a third joyfully, and I've also added the verb soaring, and I've started with the verb gazing instead. Gazing upwards, I saw birds, rather than the birds were singing. So sometimes when you want to make your writing that little bit more varied or developed, try starting your sentence with a verb rather than with the word the. Okay, good. Next, onomatopoeia. How would you define this? How would you explain what this word means, what this language technique means? You've probably heard of it. If you haven't, don't worry. It's all about learning. What does it mean? How would we define it? Can you think of any examples? So I would define onomatopoeia as being words that describe sounds and sound like the sound when you say them. That's what's great about them. They don't just describe sound when you say them. They actually sound like that sound. So that when a reader is reading the poem or reading that story, it brings it to life for them. It makes it more real because they can hear the sounds. When you're watching a movie, the sounds are there for you. They're coming out of the speakers. In a story, you have to make those sounds for the reader. So I've decided to use onomatopoeia in a sentence to describe leaves, the sound of leaves. But what sound might leaves make? What word do you think I might use? The leaves rustled in the breeze. What a great onomatopoeia. Rustle. I love this one. When you say it out loud right now. You say it. Rustle. Rustle. It literally sounds like that kind of, crispy, kind of crunchy sound of those dry leaves kind of rustling. It's amazing. What an amazing word. Here's my more developed one. Rustling gently, the leaves swirled in the breeze. So can you see how I made it better? How I improved on that sentence? I put rustling, my onomatopoeic verb, at the front, and I also added swirled for that extra bit of detail. I really, really love onomatopoeia, so I just thought I'd do an extra slide with some more of them, just because they're awesome. So we've got words like pop. I mean, when you say it, pop, you can hear the sound of popping. Slurp, when you're slurping down that milkshake. Milkshake. Boom. And drip. I mean, when you say these words, you say them right out loud right now. Pop, slurp, boom, drip. And there's so many others as well that I'm sure you can think of. Crack, snap, plop. That's always a really popular one with my students. The younger ones, they do love plop. So use these in your writing. Look for them when you read a piece of writing. Next, Metaphor. But what is metaphor? How would you define it? How would you explain what metaphor is? You've got a couple of seconds. How would you explain what it is? This is how I define it. When you describe something by saying it is something that it is not. And this sounds like a strange thing to do. For instance, is a metaphor me saying the cushion is a kettle? No, because that's just me saying something is randomly something else. It has to have an effect. It has to create an impression of that particular thing. So I decided to describe the sea in a metaphorical way, and here is my simple sentence. I could see the mountains and the blue crystal that was the sea. Where's the metaphor? Can you spot it? What is the metaphor in this sentence? So it's me saying that the sea was a blue crystal, when the sea generally is not a blue crystal. If it is, I would suggest you don't try to dive in it, or you're gonna be smashed to pieces. It's a metaphor. Here's my more developed sentence. In the far distance, I could see the mountains and the dazzling blue sapphire that was the sea. So I just upped my game a bit here. I jazzed it up. Rather than crystal, I chose sapphire, which is like a blue precious stone. It's there to really convey the idea of how bright and shining and shimmering and glistening the sea is. Comparing it, saying it is a blue crystal, but it isn't. It's just a metaphor. Awesome. Okay, next. Now we're on to the I of promise, imagery. And what is imagery? How would we define it? Imagery is when the writer uses language to create images in the reader's head. And you actually use some of the other techniques to create imagery. That metaphor I just used, saying that the sea is a dazzling blue crystal, immediately puts a picture in your head of the sea being so blue and so shiny and so glittering. But you're also going to use things like verbs, things like adjectives, to really put a picture, an image in the reader's head, because it isn't like a film. In a film, it's all there, done for you. You can see what is happening, it's right there. But in a book, you have to describe it. Someone has to create the images, have to paint a picture in the reader's head so they can imagine it. So I decided to describe the sky and the clouds. You may have noticed I've gone with a nature theme. I'm a big nature fan. So here's my simple sentence. Above my head stretched the bright blue sky, in which I could see a few wisps of white cloud. So you can see here I've described the sky as bright and blue. I've described the clouds, a few wisps of white cloud. So it creates this more specific picture in the reader's head. And then I wrote a more developed sentence. Above my head stretched the enormity of the bright blue sky. It was marred only by a few faint wisps of white cloud. So I just added a bit more detail, enormity and marred. And if there are any words that I use in any of these videos, my advice is to go away and look them up. Use the internet. It's right there, probably in your hand, in a phone. You may actually be using a phone to watch this video. Go away and look up vocabulary. Find out what it means. Own it, make it your own, and then use it in your own pieces of writing. Okay, we're doing really well. Next up, S, simile. But what does simile mean? How would we define simile? How would we explain what a simile is? How would you define it? Here's my definition. It's when you compare something to something else using as or like. It's a comparison. So I decided that I would write a simile about trees. Particularly like this GIF. It's a good one. I love a good GIF. I spent quite a lot of time on the internet searching these up. So here's my sentence. The trees above me stood tall and proud like guardians of the earth. So where's the simile? Well, I'm comparing trees to guardians of the earth. And here's my more developed sentence. Looming over me were the tall and proud trees. I felt safe, as though they were protective guardians of the earth. So again, I've just jazzed it up a bit. Rather than starting the sentence with the, I've started it with the verb looming. And I've just added a little bit more detail, like protective guardians. I've just added another adjective in there. So really creating that sense of trees as being these amazing beings, watching over us, protecting us. Trees are great. I love trees. Go and climb them. Climbing trees is also awesome. So, last one, emotive language. What does this mean? How would you define it? How would you explain it? So, my definition: words and phrases designed to convey and evoke feelings. Words connected with feelings. You've really got to make your reader feel something. When you do a piece of writing or you write a poem, you want your reader to feel excited or scared, or tense or even angry. But you're going to want to put emotive language in there. Writing has got to have feelings. It's got to make people feel something. They've got to really get into it. You've got to really tug at those heartstrings. So, for my final sentences, I've decided to write this. The beauty of nature was all around me, and I was grateful to be able to experience such peace. And my more developed version: nature's beauty enveloped me, gratitude and tranquility filled my heart. So here we have the emotive language, emotions, feelings, connected here with peace, serenity, tranquility, joy, etc. Just kind of really summing up all these sentences I've been writing. So, what I decided to do was I put them all together. These aren't just separate sentences. I put them all together into a short piece of writing. So I'm going to read it aloud, and while I do, maybe you should see if you can remember what language techniques have I used in here. Can you spot them? Can you remember them and spot them? The sun smiled down on me. The birds were singing joyfully and swooping joyfully. The leaves rustled in the breeze. I could see the mountains and the blue crystal that was the sea. Above my head stretched the bright blue sky in which I could see a few wisps of white cloud. The trees above me stood tall and proud, like guardians of the earth. The beauty of nature was all around me, and I was grateful to be able to experience such peace. And I've also laid it out like this, so it looks maybe a little bit more like a poem, because the whole point about language techniques is that you use them in a variety of types of writing, creative writing, descriptive writing, poetry. And finally, I put together the more developed sentences I wrote, just so we can see them all together rather than them being isolated. We can see them all together. So let's read along. Brightly, the serene sun smiled benevolently down on me. Gazing upwards, I saw birds singing joyfully, swooping joyfully, and soaring joyfully. Rustling gently, the leaves swirled in the breeze. In the far distance, I could see the mountains and the dazzling blue sapphire that was the sea. Above my head stretched the enormity of the bright blue sky. It was marred only by a few faint wisps of white cloud. Looming over me were the tall and proud trees. I felt safe, as though they were protective guardians of the earth. Nature's beauty enveloped me. Gratitude and tranquility filled my heart. So hopefully you spotted and remembered some of those Promis language techniques that we've been learning. So, what I think you should do to interact is now think to yourself, can you remember what each of these stand for? And what is the definition? Give yourself a little test. Test yourself. And then go back and watch the video again to see if you got them right. So P, personification. What does it mean? How would you define it? Maybe write your own sentence using personification. R, repetition. Again, what does it mean? Define it in your own words. Write a sentence using repetition. And the same for onomatopoeia, metaphor, imagery, simile, and emotive language. Test yourself now. Can you write your own definition for what they mean? And preferably, do your own sentences. Think of something you could describe. Anything. The sea, a train journey, the playground, your garden, your bedroom, anywhere. And then see if you can describe them or write a poem using some of these language techniques. And we're done. Well done. You learned Promis. You learned the language techniques. Good work. Or if you knew them already, you revised them. Well done. Here is a little bit of sarcastic clapping from a woman called Nancy Pelosi. If you know who she is, great, well done. If you don't know who she is or you're too young, that's cool. Maybe you'll find out who she is. She's awesome. I particularly like her, and I really, really love her sarcastic clapping. Hero. Right, we're done. Good work. I'm off. Dinner time. Glad you learned Promis. See you again for some more fun videos. Take care. Over and out.